The secret that most professional artists know that some beginners don't is a little process called iteration. But what is iteration and how can you use it? Hi, my name is Zach. I have about 5 years experience freelancing, and before that, 10 years experience just painting and drawing. The biggest difference between those two versions of myself wasn't actually talent, it was trying to do this process. Iteration is kind of like having a conversation with your artwork as you're doing it. You have to talk and try new ideas and figure out what's happening by listening and paying attention. Another interesting thing about learning how to iterate is that you also learn faster. You're not conforming to an idea early on, you're continuing to change and continuing to do new things. So here's a story I like to tell that talks about iteration, but talks about it in the capacity of quantity versus quality, which is also a lot of where iteration comes up in these sort of conversations. The story goes like this. The professor splits the class into two groups. Group A is graded on quality, and they had to produce one perfect image by the end of the term. Group B was graded on quantity. They just had to take as many photos as possible. By the end of the term, all the best graded photos came from Group B, even though Group A was working a lot harder to try and make perfect images. Now, where that comes into play, or why that might be the case, is because Group B just simply learned how to iterate. They took the same idea over and over from different angles and different lighting and different framing. And Group A was so focused on perfection that they just never found the right idea, and they stopped exploring entirely. So here we are. We have this lighting set up for some headphones, and it's pretty standard to what you'd see in a commercial production or anything like that. There's a lot of lights going on. You've got this sort of hard light center, you've got this rim light, you got a second rim light, a fill over the top, and then this backlight as well that's bouncing. This is pretty overdone, but it's pretty standard too. However, when I start removing some lights and adding new things, you can see that there's a lot of fun little experiments that you can do, right? So when you realize you can start iterating pretty easily by just taking out a few lights. So this is just the same setup duplicated, and I've removed all the lights besides the backlight that's bouncing off of the surface back here, as well as this hard light that's coming up. And you get something that's more creative, and you start iterating faster and seeing new things that you wouldn't have otherwise. And then finally from there, I combined both the lessons I learned from changing up the colors in the background to changing up the lighting, and I was able to come up with something that I thought was a better representation of good lighting and product rendering by combining the two types of variations that I learned from the iteration process. Headphones are really cool, but it's not really finished, and with iteration, it's important to try and finish as much as you can. So that kind of brings me to my next setup here. The goal for this project was pretty simple. I just wanted to visualize a sort of Ori star system in a couple of different ways. And so I started out with this cube, or sorry, this sphere here, and then I went on to building this one, which I thought was just a little bit better. And then I came up to this one to do a more traditional approach. And then finally I came up to this one, which is a really modern, really much more simple take on the overall structure. Now, I realized that none of these really are successful by themselves, but if I combined them like this, they come together and coalesce in a much larger star system Ori that tells a broader story. And so iteration can not only be something that's going off of one object, but a whole cohesive story that can change in and out of something larger or something smaller. It's always important to stay open and try new things as you're going along, because you might see that the thing that you're looking for is something that's larger or something that's more story focused rather than something that's object focused. The other important note here is to try and finish something when you're iterating. it can be really easy to take your iteration process and just go over and over and over and never really finish. But the last 10% of every project is really where you're going to find a lot of the learning that you will do with your iterations. For instance, I could have stopped at creating all 4 of these little orreries and then just been happy with making an animation for the last one that I liked. But because I continue to push it and put it all together in this overall system that's a little bit larger, I was able to come together and find something much more fascinating and create a much larger story overall. So for this last example, I wanted to show you the importance of iterating while you're creating. So this is a piece that I was really proud of, and I wanted to share how I used a really strong reference to continue to iterate over and over and over again. So this is all of the different things that I created for one single animation that I'll show you right here. Now that you've seen my animation, check out Albin's and compare the difference. Albin's is arguably a lot better, but I wanted to show you how sticking to a reference and trying to stay open to the process at the same time can lead you to better iteration. And this leads me to today's sponsor as well. Rococo lets you create in real time, which means that you're iterating in animation in real time. Instead of having to hand animate everything and then go back and check, you're using motion capture to actually create the animations that you're working on, which makes the process of learning and trying to make things very fluid and iteration friendly. That freedom to adjust consistently over and over again is exactly what iteration is all about. If you're looking for Rococo gear, definitely use my link down below. It gives you 5% off, but it also supports this channel immensely. I'll end with this important point. You can master iteration pretty easily, emotional intelligence throughout this process by being able to compare the artwork rather than yourself is really important here. You don't want to say, I'm worse. You want to say, this scene is really hard and what I'm trying to do can greatly benefit from these other ideas. And then you keep going further and further over time as you finish, and as you continue to reference, you will be better at iterating overall. Thank you so much for watching. Definitely comment below if you have some stories or different ideas from your process where you've learned something from iteration. It's really important, and it's almost like a collegiate level understanding of art. Some people get it naturally and they might not even know that it's called iteration, but they still do it anyway. However, for the vast majority of the rest of us, we have to go through these concepts and learn them and utilize them consciously until they are unconscious for us. So definitely comment below and give a little story or a little synopsis of where iteration or something like iteration has helped you create something really spectacular and something that you've done in the past that you were proud of.